And a very good morning, good evening, or good afternoon to you, wherever you're watching in the world today. Welcome to Learning Now TV.
take a look at what's coming up on tonight's programme.
It's now time for this month's broadcast of Learning Now TV.
Welcome to another year of Learning Now TV. It's 2020 and we've got a great show to kick off the year. What's on? What's on, Kate?
Another packed programme, as always,
Good.
kicking the new year off with a good start. We've got Gerd Driesen all the way over from the Netherlands talking about how to make compliance training better. I think we could all probably benefit from some insights there. My esteemed colleague David Perring from Fosway talking about our new research. And the big name is Bob Mosher, learning expert, worldwide renowned, talking about learning in the flow of work.
Excellent. Enjoy the show. We need to focus a little bit more on analytics. So I'm extremely pleased that David Perrin, the Research Director at Fosway, has agreed to come and speak with me today. So welcome, David.
Thanks very much, Nigel. It's great to be here.
Tell us a little bit about, not the history of Fosway, but where have you come, say, in the last year? What's moving for you?
Oh, the thing is, I think for us, one of the major shifts has been we've been broadening our analysis of the HR system space.
Okay.
So traditionally, I suppose if you went back 20 years, we were focused primarily on learning and learning technology.
You can't have been doing it for 20 years. A young man like you.
I know, but beneath these grey locks is a young man bursting to get out. Yeah, remembers those old days. But we've been focusing on learning for probably, as I said, almost 20, over 20 years, because we had our anniversary 3 or 4 years ago. But we've been broadening over the last year our focus onto systems like talent acquisition.
Yes.
And also looking at employee engagement. So really broadening our lens, and that's sort of against the background of us also looking at integrated talent management and also cloud HCM. So it's really sort of taking a very broad view of the HR systems landscape and trying to get a sense of how that stitches together.
Yes, and also just keeping up with the trends. Like, if you were still managing without mentioning the word talent, you'd be in big trouble.
That's true.
Yeah, you've got to work with the way the world is going, essentially.
Yeah, very much
and you're
so.
doing that. So, go on.
And I think what's interesting is actually the touch points around where talent or conversations around talent are beginning are shifting a little bit.
Yes.
And we're seeing that in the marketplace, especially around employee engagement.
Yes.
How those employee engagement surveys and the conversations around taking a pulse of where individuals are at the moment is starting to influence then the manager discussion around so what really is the driver for somebody.
And starting to influence policy. It used to be that you did a talent manager survey, you did a staff survey, everything's awful, you let everyone know that you'd received it and you moved on and did it again the next year. Nothing changed, no one was really particularly interested. It was like going through the motions. Now it's actually the core of policy and strategy, and technology is part of that. You know, how can we create technology that can engage staff, can help them do their work better, and help the HR people do their job better, move a little bit from tactical to strategic. All of that is happening, isn't it?
Yeah,
in
very
your
much
field?
so. And I think there's something about how you release the energy of individuals.
Yes.
And sort of seeing that the energy that people bring and how you can either empower them and physically energize them, or how you can take distractors away is something that I think we're seeing grow in the marketplace overall. So in parallel with people talking about engagement, they're also talking about well-being. So it's not only bring your best self to work, but also enable that to be a sustainable best self.
Yes.
And I think that's something that we can probably really buy into, especially as we see the trends around digitization and the challenges from robotics and AI and the sort of projections from people like Accenture and others, McKinsey, around the influence that's going to have on the workspace and who's there.
Yeah. So let's just focus then on current work. What are you doing at the moment that will interest everyone who's listening to this?
Too much.
Too much. Fair enough.
The thing is, in some ways, we've been doing some crazy things, and that we've had 4 concurrent research projects.
Yes.
That are currently,
That's quite crazy.
That is a bit crazy. So one has been around the human HCM market space.
Yes.
So we've been profiling over 15 providers to put into our 9 grids, and then also creating the trends around the solutions and the marketplace itself. Yes. We've been doing the same for integrated talent management, so that's about another 15, 20 providers that we've been profiling, including the addition of those engagement well-being players, which is new for us.
Yes, that is new. Yeah, who are the leading players in engagement and well-being?
Oh, it's interesting, actually. I think, again, it depends on the maturity of the organisation.
Yeah.
Some of the ones that stick out to me, I'd pick out, there's a nice niche provider called Enboarder, who are doing things around onboarding, which is really, they've got amazing customer testimony, right? So real customer advocacy, which is one of the things we really look for.
Yes.
An organisation called Culture Amp is really interesting out there. And what they're starting to do is sort of draw the line between, so what do we know about the individual? How can that also, and their sentiment, and enable the manager to have some constructive conversations.
I think
that's really interesting.
One of the
Achievers would be another good one around reward.
What are they? Achievers?
Achievers around reward and recognition.
Okay.
So how you power that sort of culture.
Yeah. What I find is that whenever a 9 grid comes out, I look at it in 2 ways. One is I really like to know who are the leading lights, but I'm equally interested in who are these people that I've never heard of, and I always explore, because you don't know, this person that you've never heard of can be powering through the market.
Exactly.
So it's really useful as just an overview. So in one page, I can take in the market, and that is invaluable, I think, for people.
And we try our best to take a very European-centred view.
You do, indeed. You're not. Otherwise, it used to be just mostly US-centric.
Very much so.
So you are the UK-centric people, and I think people find that very helpful because.
And we're trying to, in that sort of breath, take into consideration the complexity of European organisations when they're working across countries and boundaries and cultures.
Yes.
And also the systems infrastructure. They tend to have grown much more organically. Don't have simplicity. It's how you create a journey for your own solutions and systems that is really at the heart of what we're trying to help people understand. What's manageable, what is the right next step. And I think the 9 grids are interesting in that we try to talk about them being different from things like Gartner or IDC. It's not about being top right. It's about trying to find the right scale partner for you as an individual.
And you might well be much further down the grid and still find a really useful partnership and a useful organisation that you might not have obviously stumbled across in your normal research. So you don't only do the 9 grids. What else are you doing at the moment that would interest everyone who's
we're also doing the HR realities research.
Okay.
So
what is HR realities?
So what we try to do is just ask very straightforward questions around people's HR tech and their drivers around HR in their organisation. So things like what are your business drivers? What are your measures of success? How much do you like your systems? What systems are you looking at changing over the next 2 to 3 year horizon? What are the important parts of your employee value proposition?
So is that all about benchmarking, essentially?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah, so organisations look at that and go, oh, wow, I'm up there, or oh, I'm not.
Yeah, exactly. And then, but it's very much what do they call it? I suppose it's not even a 180 view, right? It's just a self-assessment. So actually trying to sort of make sense of people's true maturity.
Yes.
I think you have to sort of maybe take it with a little bit of a pinch of salt, because it's not qualified. We're not saying this person is at the highest levels, even if they think they are.
But it's your peers.
Exactly.
Your peers are speaking, so therefore it's very helpful.
And what I think we prefer to people think about is the questions that it prompts.
Yes.
So should you be going down that route if other people are going in a particular direction? What would be the business drivers around that? And what would make it impactful for you? And using some of the insight that you get from others to hold up to say, is that my reality?
Yeah. So you're looking at the business drivers, essentially. You're saying, I'm reading this and going, wow, they're my business drivers. I better read this closely. They're really not my business drivers. I can let that slip by. So conclusion, You are working very hard at the moment. There is going to be lots of good, juicy material coming out over the next few months.
Yep, definitely.
Follow Fosway if you want to get access to it, because you hand all that stuff
It's
out.
all for free.
It's all for free.
Yeah.
And anyone who's not using Fosway material is not informed fundamentally. They're not looking clearly at the marketplace. You're doing a great job,
Thank you.
David. Really great job.
Well, and what I'd hope is that people get involved and they will participate in the surveys. And if they have burning questions, send them in. We're looking at ways of actually searching.
You
things
need
that are important.
people to come back to you as much as they need you to come back to them.
Exactly.
David Perrin, pleasure to talk to you today.
As
Thank
always.
you so much.
Thank you, Nigel.
DPG's online courses are designed to fit around your life, so you can study anytime, anywhere. Get in touch now for more info.
Next up on Learning Now TV, I'm delighted to welcome the Chief Insights Officer from Towards Maturity, Jane Daly. Jane, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
Now, how long are you into your new role as Chief Insights Officer?
So it's been 8 months since Laura has left us, but I've been around a bit longer than that, but
Of
8
course.
months officially.
Of course. And just for our listener, our viewers, can you tell us just a tiny little bit about your background? Because actually you come from the practitioner side of things, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've worked in a number of guises, but my biggest role was at Marks & Spencer, where I was Global Head of Learning and Development, where we looked after 100,000 employees all over the world. And of course, everything we did in our supply base as well. But apart from that, I've worked with my own practice. I've also been linked Towards Maturity since leaving Marks & Spencer, and I worked in the provider market as well. So quite a few different areas.
And what is it about the research and the evidence-based side of things that has drawn you into that rather than staying on the practitioner side?
It's a really good question because when I met Laura, I was a top deck organisation as part of the health check that she was running. And she always said to me, you'll be sitting here one day. And I was just like, no, that will never happen to me. And here I am. And I've been delighted to be involved in shaping, how people can get just so much more out of their learning and OD practices. And I think for me, there's two things really. It's never evidence on its own. It's the context of what
Absolutely.
you look at it in.
Yeah.
But the other thing for me is that the speed and the quality that you can bring by looking at objective evidence. And I've always grown up in organisations where they really cared about doing things once and doing it properly. And that's where I see where evidence can help this industry.
Now, where are you in that? And is there anything that's kind of jumping out at you in that process?
Yeah, it's a really exciting time for us. We are a small team who punch above our weight. So we are, as you say, in the throes of looking at the evidence as we speak. We pick up evidence from all different sources. So we have the health check, and we're delighted this year that we've collected more data than ever before.
Great.
We now have data that's coming from 83 countries around the globe.
Great.
And we've gone deeper and wider than ever. And I was lucky enough to be able to change some of the things we were looking at as well this year. So we're very excited about some of the things we're seeing.
Okay. And is there anything that is standing out to you? Anything you can give us a sneaky peek at?
Yeah, definitely. So a couple of hot off the press things is that what we're already seeing is that investment is significantly going up in digital in particular. And when I say digital, I mean the whole raft of that. So people now spending 21% of their budgets, only 21%, a lot of people would probably say, but it's 21%, and that has risen, not surprisingly. So investment is going up in digital, in content, in resource in L&D, surprisingly. But the impact is going down. So we've got a real challenge on our hands.
And that's people are self-assessing, saying they're seeing the impact of what they're doing lessening?
Yes, absolutely. So obviously what the health check does, it allows people to reflect on their investments, as I say, whether that be time, energy, resources, cost, etc., and the impact of that. And the health check is really interesting because it's been a longitudinal study that has gone on for a while. And there's things that we track to make sure we've got a consistent barometer of what's going on. But we always look at some newness as well. And it's the combination of those things that make it a real credible health check. I mean, we're tracking a number of behaviours, and the kind of things that we're seeing are very, very interesting.
So doesn't sound too healthy. Investment going up is great, but surely we have to demonstrate some value for that investment to continue to trend upwards.
We absolutely do, but I think we also need to put it into the context of what's going on in the wider world. It's clear that any way you look at L&D, it is struggling to keep up, but businesses as well. So I don't think we should be surprised. Is what we're seeing is some massive friction going on, but we're not becoming more mature in what we're doing, which is what, of course, Towards Maturity was set up to do.
Do you think it's because L&D sort of lurches too much from one thing to the next? Is there not enough depth to get to that next level of maturity?
It's such an interesting question, Kate, and we've been stress testing our own data and evidence and the sources that we bring in. And one thing that I've done in particular since coming in is making sure that we're looking at even wider multiple sources. We always did that, but I've taken that to the next level. So we've been tracking all of the empirical evidence that's going on, the insight we bring in ourselves, which is what we call the profession insight, the voice of the consumer learner themselves, because how they're consuming things is changing, and of course the impact on business as well. And it's the combination of all of those things that makes us able to be really evidence-based and evidence-informed in what we do, because there is a huge amount of fake noise and news out there. And of course, I know the work that you guys do as well. It's really important that we guide and we really help the industry do less better. But a lot of the things that we're seeing and hearing are surface issues. What we're really getting to is down into those bowels of those root causes.
So lots to look forward to come February's launch then.
Absolutely. And I think it's a really difficult time for the industry because at the moment we're not evidence informed. We spoke about impact. But the really interesting thing is that a number of things are dropping, such as looking, using evidence themselves. Now, a lot of people have been scared by the word big data. We know that if you have got the right data in the right context, you actually need small data, but it needs to be of a quality that will enable for you to make better decisions, so your investments will actually achieve more. And only 10% of people today are actually comfortable with data in our world. But as you say, it is a challenge out there because today less than 50% of people analyse the need before recommending a solution. And I know, coming from a practitioner, I got a lot further by saying no than actually just deciding to do things for the sake of it.
Jump the gun.
Really analysing that need in partnership with the business.
Fantastic. Jane, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Our learning experiences unlock potential, transform the performance of people and organisations, and help millions around the world build happy and successful careers. We change lives with evidence-based learning that works, sparking real change for real impact.
It's a new year and a new Robin Hoyle. This time he's focusing on personalised learning in a me-shaped world. Interested? Fascinated? Watch here.
At the eLearning Network Connect event in London in November, Andrew Jacobs shared the work in progress that is on with the UK government departments. And there he is trying to ensure that learning follows the three justs: just in time, just enough and just for me. So personalisation is at the heart of what Andrew's doing. In the 2019 Global Sentiment Survey, Don Taylor found that personalisation and adaptive learning was number one for the second year running. But interestingly, he also found that spots 2 and 3 on his list were filled with AI and with learning analytics. And as Don commented, never before have the top 3 all coalesced around one particular subject or one topic. In fact, I remember the very first Learning Now TV, Elliot Maisy said, we are now dealing with not just that one size does not fit all, but that one size needs to fit one. So personalisation is big, it's important, everybody recognises it. But I'm slightly anxious around its link to learning analytics and AI, because I find sometimes that what we're trying to do there is to put people in little boxes, to categorise them. And I find lots and lots of people find categorising themselves pretty easy. So whether or not I categorise myself as a millennial, and you'll be glad to know that I don't, or I categorise myself as an activist, I'm happy to put myself into a little box. And as I've said before on Learning Now TV, I don't think the idea of a reason or a need to belong necessarily sits as a useful bedfellow when we're talking about learning and development. So what I'm interested in is when we're doing personalisation, what does that actually mean? I don't think putting people into some kind of demographic grouping necessarily fulfills Andrew's requirements for just in time, just enough and just for me. Here's another way of thinking about how we achieve those three justs. Maybe what we do is we tell people not just what we want them to do, but in some cases how we want them to do it. And particularly I'm talking about not only the steps they need to go through, but how well they need to perform each of those steps and stages. And then we say, look, we've got some materials for you here. We might have some videos, we might have an e-learning module or two, we may have some books and articles, we may have infographics, we may even have courses, and certainly we'll have performance support aids. And then, once people have had the chance to use those things, or not, as they see fit, then we can look at what did the peak performers do? What did the people who achieved those standards actually use to help them? Did they use the performance support aids, the videos, the e-learning, etc.? And we use that as part of our marketing strategy. So when we are encouraging people to use this material, we're telling them people who did really well last time learned this way. But we're also saying this particular piece of learning collateral is good if these things are going on for you, and not so good if these things are going on for you. So we're giving people an opportunity to make an informed choice. And of course, one of those informed choices that we're making is we're looking at those peak performers who don't use anything at all, or who only use performance support aids, because learning is not necessarily the answer to all of our performance requirements. Sometimes it's enough just to tell people what it is they need to know. So I think that's much better than making people into some kind of archetype or some kind of category or some kind of grouping and then targeting things at people who are a bit like them. Because very often a bit like them is nowhere near enough to meet the requirements of Andrew Jacobs' just in time, just enough and just for me. And I think those are pretty good mantras for to use when we're talking about personalisation, because personalisation starts with people. It doesn't start with types.
Despite time zones, I managed to find a little slot where I could bring Bob Mosher in over Skype to have a conversation, and I'm really pleased that Bob has agreed to talk to us. First question. It's about 8 or 9 years since you wrote that book, Innovative Performance Support, with Conrad Gottfredson. Tell me, in the interim, what has actually changed?
Yeah, well, it as with anything, right, Nigel? I think there's been a maturation on a couple levels, I would say, honestly, and that is for performance support to work. And I've said this all along. We mentioned in the book. There are really three things that have to align. I think, and frankly, I think for change in our industry, L&D, it's the same, and that is the maturity of those who we serve. I think I'll start there because that's why we should do anything. And clearly, since we wrote that book, my gosh, the world of self-directed learning has matured and exploded in so many ways, partially supported by technology, which we'll talk about in a second. But I think this more importantly, we become more of a self-service world because of mobility and the way we work now. We're doing this from home, right now. And so those types of things, I think they have changed the ability of the learner to do performance support and demand performance support better. Technology clearly has matured. When we wrote that book, the idea of an EPSS, electronic performance support system, was highly immature. There were maybe a couple, 2, 3 players. We track 8 now that are doing well and have matured their platforms in remarkable ways. And of course, there's been other things that have come in since. LXPs, learning experience platforms, for instance, didn't exist in 2011. They have come on. Adaptive learning, these things, have come on significantly, Nigel. And then lastly, I think, is the maturity of the methodology and the industry's willingness to move off of a training first mentality we were kind of pushing a boulder uphill when we wrote that book, to workflow learning and terms like that have emerged and I think are better than performance support in some ways, and are making our industry as tradespeople, as instructional designers, more willing and able to do it. So 3 really important areas of growth since that book was written.
Yeah. And I guess from something that was once marginal, it's now becoming mainstream. If you think about J. Cross, work is learning, learning is work, that's pretty much been your mantra for 10 or 15 years, hasn't it?
Oh my gosh. I mean, Nigel, I used to, obviously some way to look at it is, does your phone ring or do you call others, right? And so back in those days, my gosh, when we wrote that book, I was doing a lot of outbound calling, to be honest, a lot of webinars, a lot of all this stuff to kind of lift the awareness. And I absolutely agree with you. And thanks to your good work and Jay's and others over the years, David James, if you're familiar with David at all, the Elliot we talked about before, of course, and his continued support of performance support is a discipline. Absolutely, it is more in the mainstay now in large organizations, Boeing, Bank of America, KLM, Rabobank, organizations over your way and in the States are embracing this now, to your point, as the tip of the sword as opposed to an add-on or something to do if there's time.
Completely agree. So what does AI add to this mix then?
I think it's the next brave frontier, right? I think it right now we have to do some heavy lifting around context. We have to do some heavy lifting around pull versus push in this domain. And I think AI and all the items that go there, right, that we're playing with, ultimately will improve the experience and the intuitiveness of these systems. Whereas right now, there's a lot of heavy lifting on the learner side, frankly, to drive them. So it's absolutely going to become the next level, I think, of the UI and the interface for these things.
What do you do when you go into an organization? When they say we're interested, what are the first steps you take with any company you're working with?
One of the first things we do going into organizations is help not just the L&D team, candidly, but the enterprise as well, to realize that this is a pivot on performance support is a methodology, but to the learner, it's a pivot on performance first. Yeah. And how do you, when you look at a performance problem that historically we've defaulted to 5 days of something or 3 e-learnings of this, is no, wait, let's discuss from a workflow performance perspective, what is the behavior we want, and in surrounding that, what are the assets, the knowledge that enable that?
Would you agree with me, Bob, that it's really about 2 simple words? Help me. Help me when I'm some task that I can't deal with. Help me when something new has appeared across my desk that I don't know what to do. So basically, you're building increased engagement, increased performance, increased motivation for staff.
Yeah, well, you know, and I love where you're going, right? Because help me pivots on need, right? That the learner has, not what we think they need. And again, it sounds like semantics, but honestly, I know at least in my 10 years of doing this, and I still struggle, Nigel, to this day, because I was so wired in the ADDIE days of the methodology, that this shift to, wait a second, when you say help me, which they do, right? Let's dig deeper into what that means. Why, when, how, to what degree, all these different questions. Then we just launched a CRM or leadership. We want to do a leadership program. So what course should we write? What curriculum should we buy? That's a very different pivot and conversation than we have historically had.
It's absolutely true. And it radiates out from that point. So you're focusing on learners and solving learning problems.
Perfect. And to what degree can they do that alone? That's a very different viewpoint than we have historically owned, which, again, I get it, right? But when I was addressed with a learning solution, the first thing I thought was, what do I as an L&D professional need to step up to here? What do I have to provide? What deliverables do I need to build so that the learner can come to me, can consume my stuff? And I don't mean that to sound like an arrogant or a self-centered statement. It was absolutely our responsibility.
I want you to come into the organization and help me. What do I need to do first? In other words, how do I prepare for the MOSHA angle, the MOSHA input? What would be the most useful data I could gather or activities that I could do in preparation?
I would do two things, Nigel. I would go out and collect those help me questions. Right, do a little. It's interesting, my friend, that I've gotten deeper into this, and I want to be careful how I say this, because again, I don't want to imply any malicious intent here, because I'm talking about my own journey. Since I've journeyed into workflow learning, I have discovered two things: how little I truly knew what my learners needed, what those help me questions were. I knew what the SMEs wanted, the SMEs wanted me to teach, and wanted you right. But the people that I'm inflicting it on, I didn't realize how little I knew about their workflow, truly their workflow, what they do from 8 to 5, 9 to 5, whatever, and then the help me's that come up during that. So there's some very pragmatic data gathering you can do around that. Understand the workflow, and more importantly, the reality of surviving it with the help me stuff you said. And then secondly, what we ask is again, we have to have a name for everything, right? Is something we call a learning asset analysis, which is let's come to this first meeting with what's available. And where I want to push you, and if I'm talking to my L&D colleague here, is or the business, is don't come to me with classes, courses, LMSs, and those things. I get those, and you can have those too. But what I'm saying is, go into the workflow and find out what is available there. What do they use every day to survive, or whom? Because it may be a name of a person. But you will unearth remarkable resources that L&D has never touched, created, or maintained.
You're basically changing the conversation, aren't you? And I think that's very, very important. Thank you so much for joining me.
The Happy Manifesto is a book that can help you transform your organisation into a happy, productive workplace where people feel fulfilled. We are now launching an online version of the programme based on bite-sized videos, exercises and learning points. It will launch in January on Udemy at just £50, and there'll be an enhanced version from Happy, which will include webinars and further exercises. Join us to help transform your organisation. I'm Henry, I'm happy, I hope you are too.
Next up is the new part of the Charity Learning Consortium series, with Michelle Parry-Slater going out to talk to the Prince's Trust. She interviews here Tom Boyson Corbolis on their use of the apprenticeship levy.
Today for Learning Now TV, we've come to the Prince's Trust. We're going to be talking to Tom, Boyce and Corbelis about their use of the apprenticeship levy. In corporate L&D, we're not very good at making best use of the apprenticeship levy, so it's going to be really interesting hearing from Tom how in the third sector they're doing great work with the levy to invest in their people. Obviously in the third sector there's often challenges about how much you can pay people, how many bonuses, how many perks, but the levy and the investing in people is a really good way of showing people that you really do care. So let's go and find out what Tom's got to tell us today. So Tom, the levy, you're making good use of it. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, we are. This is about just over a year ago now, and we had a small amount in the levy, and we wanted to do something with that, but it wasn't really enough to really get anything big and bold out of it.
So you were contributing yourself. So you've got
Yes.
how many staff in total?
About 1,000
Okay, so you've
colleagues
got 1,000.
across the UK.
Okay, but you could get more? How's that work? How do you get more money?
Yes, so there was a rule change I think it was about last year, around April time, where other organisations can donate a certain amount of levy money to another organisation. Now, we joined forces with Tesco, and Tesco were very kind and very generous and donated a portion of their levy, which was more than we really could have hoped for.
How wonderful.
Yeah.
So what have you done with that levy? How many people has that helped of those 1,000 colleagues around the country?
So about 300 people.
That's amazing. So you've got 300 apprenticeships.
Yes, that's right.
Just
So
fantastic.
what we really wanted to do is something with leadership and management, because until then we never really had a joined up and consistent offering, and we really wanted to do something because it's so important. So we have a level 3 apprenticeship, and that's for sort of frontline managers who work with, we call them executives, but sort of youth workers.
Right.
And then a level 5 for heads and senior heads. And so that's a year program.
So you're really getting to the bottom of some of the issues that corporate L&D have. It's management staff, it's frontline staff stuff, and you're using that money really wisely, it seems. So what's the sort of, you're partway through, what's going on with that? What's the feedback that you're getting?
Well, so I've been doing some interviews recently, so I do filming for the L&D team, and I've been filming some interviews and testimonials, and the feedback that I'm getting is people feeling really empowered, having been invested in and having been sort of almost given permission to take some time aside to develop themselves, and they're actually, especially sort of, I think we talk about it a lot in L&D, is self-reflection, and they're really getting that benefit from that, and meeting other colleagues as well that work in other places that they might not normally.
So what I'm hearing really is that the benefit of the spend is not just about getting better managers, but actually this must be pulling the organisation together. It must have knock-on effects, ripples throughout the rest of the organisation. I love the fact that you talked about people feel valued because they're being invested in.
Absolutely, yeah.
Is that the sort of thing that you're hearing? Is it coming out in other ways? The benefit of L&D, really, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's really useful for people to see that investment being made, because typically in the past, budgetary constraints, it's very third sector, and having the apprenticeship levy, that's money can only be spent on apprenticeships. So it's not like we're taking money away from any other pot. It's all money that has to be spent on that. So I think that was really good.
So how are you actually spending it? Are you partnering with somebody? Are you doing it yourself? What's the story? I mean, 300 people through what programs?
So there's 2 programs, a level 3 and a level 5. That's been developed in conjunction with another partner called Rico. So they were an existing partner, and we approached them because we saw that they were offering these apprenticeships. We have helped develop some of the content for that as well.
So there's an ownership thing from the internal L&D.
Yeah,
right?
So there's a certain amount of, that's Selena, who works in our Birmingham office. She has been working with Rico to develop that. And that's a certain portion of, I think it's one of the 12 workshops, is all Prince's Trust content. And then I've been working on making the workbooks for those programs, stuff like that. So it's a big collaboration, really.
It's really lovely to hear the joint agencies coming together and supporting. It's something that perhaps in corporate L&D we don't do as well as we might. We probably could work better on the collaboration piece. Now, can you just talk to us a little bit about what are the practicalities of that collaboration? You know, how does it work with RICO? You said they're an existing partner. You've already got relationships with them. Is it down to the people, or can you talk us a little bit through that?
Yeah, well, being part of the charity sector, and this is before my time as well at the Prince's Trust, we've always needed to make the most of these partnerships because, again, money is tight and we want as much of that money to go to young people as possible. So spending, you know, money on certain equipment might not be seen as a priority. So we get some of that donated by other partners. So RICO's been a partner in that sense for a long time. We have a lot of equipment in our offices, printers and so on from them. And then we saw that they also do apprenticeships, so we approached.
So you kind of piggybacked on theirs and got your own stuff in there as well.
Absolutely.
It's a really lovely way to hear that that's working. And I guess for our corporate L&D viewers, they could perhaps think about how they could spend their CSR stuff by helping the third sector in that type of way. I mean, old printers, sounds like we wouldn't need it, but actually you could really make the benefit of it.
Absolutely, and especially, I mean, the apprenticeship levy money as well.
What a gift!
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not going to say the exact amount, but
Please don't.
it was you know, it was enough to make a huge difference. And you know, that could be a great CSR initiative.
Yeah. Well, big up to Tesco's for that. What about other things that you're doing at the Princess Trust? It can't all be, or is it all just apprenticeships? 300 people that you're responsible for putting through is huge, but you're the digital guy here, so what other things are you doing?
Well, so we're developing a bit of a strategy at the moment, but the first stage of that is looking at our existing offering and seeing what of that can be made digital. And what has to be face-to-face.
And what's the driver for digital? Why are we not just, you know, we're in a lovely classroom environment here today, why aren't we just all bringing people in here?
It's a money saver, is one big thing. And also I think, you know, if you ask anyone how they learn, you know, they're going to say, the first thing that probably says YouTube. I mean, that's certainly where I go when I want to learn something. So I make videos here and I make animations here, and it's great. And I think people do engage with that, especially if they don't have time to travel 200 miles to go to a workshop.
So it goes back to that thing you were saying earlier about spending the money wisely.
Absolutely.
You just have a bit of a better, acuter view of it when you're spending charity money rather than corporate money, I guess.
Yeah, and that's certainly a feeling. I've worked in the private sector as well, and even though I worked for a smaller company, it did seem that money was sort of a bit more freely available. And I completely understand that in the charity sector you have to make sure that it's all sort of by the book and goes to the right place. So we're trying to do more while spending less.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story about the levy. It's so refreshing to hear a levy story out there that's working, because we just don't get that as much as we should. So thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you very much for having me.
The levy then, no excuses to our corporate L&D friends to get out there and make use of it. If they can do that in the charity sector, in the third sector, then what are we doing? Really question yourselves. Go and speak to people in your finance department and just find out how much is in your levy pot and what could you do with it, because it might be more than you think. Until next time on Learning Now TV, thank you so much for joining us today.
In the L&D world, we all know our biggest challenge is knowledge fade and demonstrating ROI from our training interventions. At Elephants Don't Forget, we use artificial intelligence to guarantee that what you train your employees, they learn and retain. If you are looking to transform the impact your training content has in your business, improve the ROI, and perhaps help employees learn and retain even the dull regulatory material, drop me a line at nelly@elephantsdon'tforget.com.
Now, regular contributor Ewan Semple, who started us on the last episode with a look at why blogging might be beneficial to you, delves into some of the tools and resources you might need to get started.
Hi there. In the last of these videos, I talked a little bit about writing, and the reasons to write, the benefits of writing. And we thought that perhaps this time I might talk a little bit about the tools that you can use to write, either the devices or the software. And an upfront confession that most of what I'm going to show you are Apple devices or software written for Apple devices. And there's two reasons for that. I mean, the main one is joy, is the fact that I get a lot of pleasure out of my tools and the software and the devices themselves. And I think that's important. You know, it's hard enough to sit down and write. We'll all find reasons not to. And having some technology or software that encourages you to use it, that you enjoy using it, gets you over that first hurdle more readily. And then the second reason is innovation, and the amount of innovation there has been in the last few years in terms of software, particularly for iOS devices for writing. And a whole range of different tools doing different things, doing some things well, some things differently. And in fact, one of the challenges is to decide which you're going to use and to stick with it. And, you know, it's easy to get attracted into tinkering with all the different technology rather than doing the actual writing. So I thought it would be worthwhile maybe just to go through some of the tools that I use myself. And I know one of them I mentioned previously on these shows, and that is my watch. And the fact that while I'm walking or driving, those are the times when I tend to get the best ideas. And just being able to dictate those to my watch, either to be transcribed automatically, which the tools are getting better at doing, or just as a voice memo, a voice recording, that allows me just to capture the idea before it gets lost. And then once I've got those ideas, being able to pull them together and being able to move them around and see how they fit together can be very useful. And I'm sure many of you have come across mind mapping, and Tony Buzan wrote a lot about that, maybe 20 years ago now, I guess. And the tool that I tend to use most for mind mapping is a thing called MindNode, which just does a really good job of allowing me to move things around, and particularly on the iPad, that can become a very tactile sensation. It's part of the pleasure of the thing, is moving things around with your fingers. And I know a lot of people still claim that the best way to mind map is with paper and pencil, but I find that this being able to do so, particularly in the iPad, as I say, is a very creative process. And then once I've got those ideas roughly laid out and roughly structured, I then want to start writing. And the tool that I use for writing is a tool called Drafts, which allows you just to really quickly, you press a button, the app opens, it's a blank document, you don't have to name a file, find a file, decide what you're going to call anything, you just open the document up and you start writing. All that there is on the screen, if you choose to use it this way, is a word count, and basically you just can sit there and get on with it. And I'm sort of doing this with my hands because I use a real keyboard, even though I'm using these devices, I use a Bluetooth keyboard. So once I've got a whole bunch of text, what I'll then very often do is publish it briefly as a PDF so that I can then view it on the iPad. And again, having it in an A4 shape allows me to think about it differently. I'm not in there in the weeds writing, I'm reading something. And then I can use the pencil to annotate what I'm reading, to score things out, to highlight things. And that feels, again, a very encouraging and real process to do. It makes it fun to do. And then once I've got that rough edit, I'll very often want to move things around a little bit. So a tool that was designed by a writer for doing just that is a tool called Scrivener. And in fact, that's now available for the PC as well. And Scrivener, just a wonderful bit of software. It was how I wrote my own book 8 years ago, almost to the day. And it was just such an enabling way to write chunks of text, move those chunks of text around, see the structure emerging in the software in a way that's not so easy in a Word document, where it gets buried and you have to keep flipping backwards and forwards. Scrivener makes it just really easy to see the structure and fill the structure with content and then move it around. And in fact, with Scrivener to publish it. I also these days tend to use something called Ulysses, which is in some ways a better designed app, and removes some of the friction that Scrivener had. So Scrivener or Ulysses allow you to get the document pulled together, structured, and then in a position where you're able to just press save, publish, and export it, and send it off to whoever's waiting for it. So hopefully these tools will give you as much pleasure as they have to me.
My name's Adam Howard. I'm a digital learning partner at ASOS.
If you're looking for a learning tool that will really influence what people are doing and make a real difference, then look no further than Loop. These guys genuinely know what they're doing, and it's really helped me improve and develop as a digital learning partner. Get involved with Loop today.
I'm so pleased that I persuaded Geert Treisen to fly over from Eindhoven to our studio to speak to me today. Geert is the head of innovation at A Newspring. It's a learning platform based in Rotterdam. So welcome, Geert. Welcome.
Thank you, Nigel.
And we're going to talk about compliance.
Yeah, very exciting topic, isn't it?
It is an exciting. It should be an exciting topic.
It is.
The problem is that as soon as you mention the word compliance, 3/4 of the world begin to drift off.
Yeah.
Tell me about compliance and tell me why you think it's an exciting topic.
Yeah. Well, first, there's this paradox, like you said, if you name the word compliance training, so many people say, oh no.
Yes, exactly. Oh no.
Oh no, yeah. People don't like it. As a professional, as a training...
they see it as a burden.
Yeah.
Like, I want to do interesting stuff, but I've got compliance.
Yes, yeah. At the other hand, as a private person, we like our pilot to be compliant. We like our surgeon to be compliant. We like the people that work in the food industry or in the medicine industry to act compliant.
And our bankers as well.
Sure. So there's this strange paradox. So it's very important for us. At the other hand, when it comes to compliance training,
no one's interested.
No one's interested.
But you're interested.
Yeah, because I think we have to do it, and we have to do it in the right way. And there's a lot of nonsense going on, nonsense compliance training.
Yes.
And we should get rid of that.
Okay, so let's get rid of boring, tedious, right-click compliance training.
Yeah.
What do we put in its place, Geert?
Still compliance training, but that makes sense. And it makes sense because it's relevant. That's the first thing I think that's very
relevance.
Relevant.
Number one.
Yeah.
Okay. Number two.
Number two, that we understand the how behavior change and the influencing of behavior works.
So it's not about learning stuff off by heart. It's about focusing on behavior and behavior change.
Yeah.
That is really important.
Yeah.
I totally get that.
Learning by heart can be a part of it, but it's not the largest part.
No.
So we can't do it alone as training or learning and development professionals. We need to work together with other ones.
So it's in partnership. And
yeah,
it's about
in partnership.
Focus on behavior change, make it relevant. Okay, what else?
Yeah. And then for the knowledge part, because often there is a knowledge part, or maybe it's a regulation that says, okay, you have to be certified or whatever, so you have to take the exam. We can't always fight that. Then we should use technology to help learners learn in the most effective and efficient way.
Okay, and that isn't just page turning on a screen?
No.
Okay. What is an efficient way? Give me an example.
Well, it's the use of technology, but if it's about knowledge retention, there are a lot of applications out there today, really good ones, that help you with knowledge retention.
And it needn't be boring.
No, it needn't be boring.
And if it's scenario based.
Yeah, but so
engaging people.
Relevant examples, relevant context, and if people know and understand that it's relevant for them, for their job to be done, then it doesn't have to be exciting. They understand that if it's relevant, it's okay.
Yes, and also that it's engaging.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be exciting, but it does need to be engaging.
Sure.
It doesn't have to be incredibly boring and only text-based. Okay, so that's really a good kind of checklist of what makes compliance better. Give me an example of moving from a bunch of pages on a screen that you right-click and then are tested every 5 minutes, utterly tedious. How would you build a compliance module that includes that partnership, that includes online, but also has other elements?
Yeah, I think it starts earlier because I found out there is a lot of compliance training out there that doesn't make sense because, for instance, there was this company in the US who had a heat illness module, the heat illness module in their LMS, compliance training module. People all over the US did that module. Also the people in the States that never have heat illness.
Yes, that's one thing, isn't it? So only focus on those who actually need it.
Yeah.
and it's either, if it's not relevant, which is one of your points, if it's not relevant, you don't have to do it.
Yeah. So first we have to, what I call, peel the compliance training onion.
Yes.
Is it really relevant?
Yes.
Who says there has to be training? Who says this has to be, the content has to be included in the training? Who says this target group needs to be trained? So if we peel the compliance training onion to the core of what's really needed, and also have a conversation with stakeholders, also those who are from the government or issuing bodies or whatever, say, okay, this is what we need to do. How can we make it relevant in our situation?
Yeah, so that's the partnership.
Yeah.
You can't make the decision of what is relevant. You have to do that in partnership.
Yeah.
But you can say, let's peel it back.
Yeah.
Let's get to the essence of what is necessary and for whom.
Yeah.
So there's that relationship. Once you know that, you can go away and start the process of building something,
Yeah.
and then you go back to the client and say, is that going to work? Is that sufficient? Is it interesting?
Yeah.
And you try it with a small group. So you do a bit of kind of design thinking. You iterate, you
Yeah.
build small, you trial it, go again until you get something that is exactly what is necessary, no more. That's the key, isn't it, to what you're saying?
Yeah.
No more than is necessary
Yeah.
to get someone through and to make sure that they're fully qualified and compliant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we can also use technology to make personalized learning path. So if you have been in a job many years before,
You need less than someone who's just
you
started.
need less. You take a first check,
Yes.
and then the system will guide you through the most effective and most efficient route for you, so
Yes.
that you will only spend time on what's relevant for you.
And I
If
think,
I'm
can I just,
early in my job, I need to
you
take
need to
more.
do the whole thing.
Yeah.
I think that in itself would be an absolute fundamental change, because the problem with compliance is everyone is sheep-dipped, regardless of how many times you've done it. And it's just, I think some people do the training with their eyes closed, just go click, It's really, really very poor. And that means that the retention is very small, the behaviour change is non-existent. With what you're proposing, there's the chance of doing something that is just enough, just right, and engaging, and not the usual kind of boring procedure. But it requires that partnership, rethinking between the organisation and the supplier.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes. I think that's
and we need to
very
have
good
those discussions,
we
those
do
conversations.
need, yes. So have you written something? You've got a book there. So just hold that up. So that is called How Learning Professionals Can Crack the Compliance Training Code.
Yeah.
That's free from the A New Spring website. So you just go
free
to
ebook. Yeah.
and you can download it. And that kind of works around the principles that we've just discussed.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's good, solid, grounded advice that is applicable in any circumstance. There's no area where, it works for that, but not from that. And yet it will make people think differently about compliance and therefore produce something that's different. Ger, I think that was extremely helpful, very focused, and very useful, and I urge people, get that download and think about compliance in a different kind of way.
Yeah.
Is that true?
That's true, because it's also of influence on our learning culture. If
It
you
is.
mess up with this, you
mess up on
with
everything.
Yeah.
You're so right, because it's the core.
Yeah.
And if the core is rotten, the whole thing is rotten. I completely agree. Ger Driesen, thank you so much. Thank you for coming all the way from Eindhoven.
It's my pleasure.
It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Nigel.
Thank you for joining us for another packed show and getting 2020 off with a bang. Nigel, are there any events coming up in the new year that we should be aware of?
There are. There's the Learning Technologies Conference, the big one, which is on the 12th and 13th of February. And then we've got the Learning Awards dinner in the Hilton, hot foot on the conference on the 20th of February. So we'll see you next month.